I was totally ready to start this podcast on time. I was totally ready. I thought it was 8:30. I was ready to jump right into it and have everything all set up. And I had my microphone plugged in. It's funny about that. You think you're all good to go. You've got all your equipment set and everything in place of where it's supposed to be, and you don't have your microphone plugged in. Welcome to the Panther-Lair Show. Tuesday night, May 19th, 2020 is the live stream on YouTube. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the place where you can watch the live stream and you can interact as it happens. And then, of course, the podcast released on Wednesday morning. We appreciate you tuning in and checking it out however you're doing it, whether you're on the live stream or if you are listening to the podcast. And of course, if you are on the live stream, find that subscribe button. Subscribe to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. We want to get those subscriber numbers up. I want to see what we can maybe build here on YouTube, in addition to the stuff that we do on Panther-Lair.com, which obviously is the main focus, and that's what we like to do. But I think there's opportunities to expand the site throughout some broader spaces, and YouTube is certainly one of them where I think we've got some opportunities. So if you're on the live stream and you're not subscribed to Panther-Lair.com on YouTube, just click the subscribe button. You don't have to do anything. It's not like there's a subscription fee. And if you're not on the live stream, you're listening to the podcast, go to YouTube, search for Panther-Lair.com, go to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's just one word, Pantherlair.com. Go check that out and just hit subscribe, and then you'll get a notification when we go live or we post a new video or whatever it is that we do here. You'll find out about it, and you'll be tuned in. And like I say, that's a key. YouTube really values what you can get on the subscription front. You need to get the subscriber numbers up before they really start to take notice. So let's try and get those numbers bumped up. So subscribe if you can. We really do appreciate it. I was distracted before we started the podcast on Twitter, as is often the case. Twitter tends to do that. You tend to get distracted by what you see on that website. And the great South Oakland for Life is running a poll, a bracket, a tournament of things that are no longer in Oakland. And this has been distracting me quite a bit over the last week or two, or however long they've had this thing going. And there's one up tonight, and it's Pitt Stadium, which is the number 1 seed in its region of the bracket, against Uncle Jimmy's, which is the number 5 seed in that region. And it was a brutal region with Pitt Stadium and Uncle Jimmy's, and I think Forfact was in there. I think Cumpy's was in there. Scotty, the hot dog guy outside Hillman Library, was in there, which I feel bad for the young people of today. We're doing so many things to, leave them in a really terrible situation, down the road. Earlier generations are not leaving a lot for the younger generations to build on, not creating a great foundation. We're also not leaving them with Scotty, the hot dog guy. They're missing out on that. I mean, you could go and give the guy $2 or $2.50 or whatever it was and get a great hot dog, and the man would put a piece of chicken on top of the hot dog. You got 2 meats for one. It was amazing. And so it was a brutal region, probably the most stacked region in this tournament of things that were not, or that are no longer in Oakland. And you're now down to this 1 versus 5 matchup of Pitt Stadium and Uncle Jimmy's. And everybody knows what Pitt Stadium was, but I don't know, not everyone would realize what Uncle Jimmy's was. It was a bar on Semple Street, kind of that stretch of Semple between Bates Street and Ward Street, or Bates and Ward. And there were a handful of businesses in there. Larry and Carol's was in there. I think the Campus Deli, was it called that? Campus Deli on the corner of Semple and Bates. The Sod, and then ultimately, and then Bootleggers was on the other side of the street. But you had the Campus Deli, you had Larry and Carol's. The Wing Pit was further down, closer to Ward Street. Of course, there was that little corner store, which I think is still there on the corner of Semple and Ward. And right kind of in the heart of it all was Uncle Jimmy's, which was just an outstanding premier dive bar that was frequented by locals, as much, if not more than college kids. It was frequented by locals, and it was a great place to go. I mean, it was my favorite place to go in Oakland. I spent more time at Uncle Jimmy's and visited there on more occasions than I did at Pitt Stadium. I went to Pitt in 1997, so I only caught a few years of the final few years of Pitt Stadium, and really didn't make that many trips up there. But I went to Uncle Jimmy's a lot. throughout undergrad and beyond. And it was just, you always have those college bars. And we've got plenty of Pitt things to talk about, but I was distracted by this when I started the recording tonight. But I think everybody who goes to college has their favorite bar. And you'd be hard-pressed sometimes to say, what was it that was distinguishable about that bar? What was distinct about that bar against other college bars? What made me prefer Jimmy's to the Sod that was right across the street? Or, Compy's, which was up on Atwood Street, although that was a unique place because they had live music a lot and had a lot of memories from that spot, or even some of the places up on Forbes Avenue and beyond. And and I never really was a big Peter's Pub guy. I didn't go to. I think I maybe went into Peter's once. That really didn't do it for me. It wasn't really my crowd or my scene, and for whatever reason, Jimmy's was just the spot, and it was. I was a big fan of that bar. So, but it's fun. You should look it up. Let me. It's South Oakland for life. South Oakland for life with SOUF South. You got to go to their Twitter page, and they've got. I think it's just South SOUF _ Oakland. OAKLIN, and they're just running this tournament, and you vote, and it's like I say, Pitt Stadium against Jimmy's, and as of this recording, Jimmy's is getting slaughtered, which I expected to happen. But look, Pitt football found another place to play, man. There's never been, and there never will be, another Jimmy's. You're not going to put a Jimmy's down on the North Shore and recreate the atmosphere that it had on Semple Street, tucked away between Bates and Ward. But anyway, this is what I'm thinking about. This is where my head's at tonight. Got people chiming in on the live stream already. And, a few people were pointing out the Bootleggers is still there. It is. My point was just that it used to be the Sod and then it turned into Bootleggers. And either way, it never really did anything for me. It was never really my preferred spot. On to Green 19 has observed that I am wearing a hat for tonight's podcast, and that's true. He asks, On to Green 19 says, are you wearing the hat because A, rivals made you, B, you can't get your hair cut, or C, your wife cut your hair and it didn't go well? Well, no to B and C. My wife did not cut my hair, and she did not make me. No to C. My wife did not cut my hair. No to A. Rivals did not make me. It is a Rivals hat. They did not make me. They gave me the hat for free. I'm not Ben Roethlisberger, and I can't get a haircut right now. I would like to. I wish I could go to the barber and get a haircut, but I can't right now, and so I'm wearing hats a little more frequently than maybe I did in the past. I kind of opened it up here on the podcast for this week, and instead of coming in with maybe some specific topics I wanted to discuss, although there are a couple things I wanted to talk about, I threw it open to questions on Twitter and questions on Facebook and questions on Panther-Lair.com of, what are your questions about Pitt football, Pitt basketball, and recruiting? Throw them out there. We'll answer them. And so we already have questions coming into the chat on the live stream. We've got questions on Twitter rolling in. Questions came in on Facebook and all that stuff. So we're going to just we're going to crowdsource this one a little bit, hive mind it, if you will. But before we do, I got to tell you about this. This, my friends, is the newest Voodoo Ranger from New Belgium. And it's called 1985 IPA. And it is outstanding. It's really good. The description on their website, totally loaded with juicy mango flavor. 1985 takes you back to the future of hazy IPAs. Buckle up. I'm going to be honest, I've been really keen on hazy IPAs lately. This one, though, might be one of my favorites. It's got a mango flavor, but it's not overly sweet. You can smell it right off the bat that it's a mango IPA. That's a good beer. Oh, boy. And if you've listened to the podcast before, I love New Belgium and their Voodoo Ranger series. I mean, people still make fun of me about the Guava Spruce double IPA that we talked about for so long from out of the Voodoo Ranger series. But, man, this is just outstanding. An outstanding beer. I think this 1985, it's perfect for summer because it's cool, it's refreshing, it's kind of fruity, it's a little sweet but not too sweet. It's good, and it's a hazy IPA, which, like I say, has sort of been it's been my bag lately. And just before I And just before I started the podcast, I did a quick Google, a quick search on New Belgium's website. Within like 5 miles of the South Hills where I live, there's 42 locations where you can get 1985 IPA. Go out and grab some. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Go sit on the back porch or have it while you're grilling or something like that. You'll enjoy it because it's a great tasting beer. It's a really good one. I think New Belgium outdid themselves this time. All right. Let's get through a couple questions here. In the live stream, we got Sam Smallwood chiming in. He says, which of the following would you say Jeff Capel is most likely to fill the final scholarship with? A senior, a reclassification, a transfer, or a JUCO prospect? And at what point would he give up trying? Well, last question first. You don't have to give up trying until your guys are on campus. I mean, you can add somebody late in the summer. You can add somebody in August. You can add somebody in September. I mean, you need to get them in by the time school starts, before ad drop ends, I would think. But Jeff Capel does have an open scholarship spot. They've got 12, projected right now, 12 scholarship players projected for the upcoming season roster. And you're allowed to have 13, so he's got another spot. I don't think there'll be a senior. I guess that would be the first place I would start. I don't think there'll be a senior high school recruit, a kid who's in the class of 2020 who's going to graduate from, who was always on track to graduate from high school this year. Is there still a possibility of a reclassification? A guy who is, on track or was slated or expected to graduate next year, but goes a year early. I think that's possible. A transfer, I think you would need. I mean, you're still seeing guys go into the transfer portal, so that's probably possible. A JUCO prospect, I would not expect them to be a junior college player. I would think you're probably looking if Jeff Capel uses the last scholarship spot, I'm thinking you're looking at either a reclassification or a transfer. I think those are probably the two most likely options, or a walk-on gets a scholarship for a year. Which, I mean, I don't think is the worst thing to do. I'm a little surprised they didn't do it last year. I mean, you can give a walk-on a scholarship for 1 year and tell them this is a 1-year deal. This is, you're not guaranteed to have this beyond this season, but for this season, your schooling is paid for. And, I would think if they don't get any recruits, that would be the way to go. But if you're telling me to pick from those 4 options, I would say probably a reclassification or a transfer are most likely. And I'm guessing, I think it's hard to place the odds, but I'm guessing that it would probably be more likely to be a transfer than a reclassification. And ultimately, I think it'd probably be most likely that Jeff Capel doesn't fill the spot and they go in and play with 12 scholarship players this upcoming season. Now, that's not to say they won't try to fill the spot. I think they will. But my guess is that if I had to bet on an option, I would bet on it not getting filled. Richard Tenza asks, why can't Pitt recruit tight ends? We know they can't, but why? And he's not the only one to ask that question. Somebody else, M. Clam on Twitter, said Pitt has missed out on a couple of tight end targets in the last few weeks. Will they get a tight end commitment before the season starts, or will they be scrambling again? Look, tight end recruiting is always going to be, Jeff Ferruzza on Facebook asked about, what about tight ends? Tight end recruiting has been a problem for this staff for a long time. We've talked about this for a while, that, tight end recruiting has just been an issue. And there are a lot of reasons. I mean, every year has its own reasons of why tight end recruiting has been an issue. You go back to the 2015 class. Pat Narduzzi, gets hired in December of 2014. He inherits a recruiting class that has Nick Bowers from Katanning committed. Bowers ultimately ends up flipping to Penn State, but that's that had less to do with Narduzzi and more to do with just Bowers always wanted to go to Penn State, and he was leaning that way from the time Penn State offered him, the previous fall. Even when Paul Christ was here and Joe Rudolph was here, I don't think those guys would have been able to hold on to Nick Bowers. I think he would have flipped to Penn State, even if they were still in town. So they go out of 2015. They don't get anybody. 2016, they try to get a lot of guys, never actually pull it off. They add the transfer, Chris Clark, who has to sit out in 2016, and he also got hurt. I don't think he was going to be eligible anyway due to the transfer rules. But that's all they were able to get was a transfer. Now, he's a transfer with a bunch of years of eligibility left, so it's kind of like getting a high school kid, but not exactly. And they don't get anybody in that class. 2017, they get guys. They get 3 guys. They signed 3 tight ends, Tyler Sear and Grant Kerrigan and Charles Reeves. And Sear gets on the field as a freshman. But you know how this story goes. We've talked about this. Reeves is gone by the next year. Sear makes it halfway through the season, and then he leaves the team or gets kicked off, some sort of mutual agreement that leads to his departure. Grant Kerrigan's still around, but he just got moved to offensive tackle. So nobody from that class is here. 2018, they have a commitment from Matt Alemo, the tight end from New Jersey, who goes to the same school as Nick Patty. Everything's hunky-dory, good to go. 2 weeks before signing day, things start falling apart. He takes his official visit. Things don't seem to go well there. There's some friction with him and his family and the staff or something. And he ends up going off the commitment list, and he ends up going to UCLA, I think. And now he transferred back to Rutgers. So you miss out. Although they signed Kmar Mims, who ultimately, who came as a defensive end, moved to tight end, moved back to defensive end. I think he's back to tight end now. 2019, last year they bring in 2 guys, Jason Collier and Kai Wright. Jason Collier has since moved to the offensive line. Kai Wright is still trying to make his way. He redshirted last year. It was his first year on campus, so you don't know what he's going to do. And then, of course, for this year, they bring in Lucas Kroll, the graduate transfer from Florida, and they signed Daniel Morega, the junior college player. Again, striking out on high school kids. Why are they striking out on high school kids? I mean, I think in recent years it would be the lack of production out of the tight end position, but that doesn't really account for 2016, where you're coming off 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, where J.P. Holtz and Scott Orndorff were doing really well, admittedly with different offensive coordinators, but there was a recent history of reasonable success at the tight end position. And this staff just couldn't recruit them. This staff just couldn't get it done. And inevitably, some of that is going to fall on Tim Salem, the tight ends coach, and rightfully so. He is the tight ends coach. He's got to bear some responsibility for the position, but it's not entirely on him because, we've talked about this before. There's a split of how recruiting happens with each recruit where, the position coach is involved, but you've also got the geographic area coach. You've got the guy who is assigned to North Jersey or Northeast Ohio or Georgia or South Florida or Central Florida or the Carolinas or Philly and South Jersey. You've got guys with these recruiting areas, and those guys have as much to do with recruiting each individual prospect as the position coach does. And so some of it's on Salem and some of it's on the rest of the staff because probably every guy who's been an assistant coach at Pitt in the last 5 years has missed on a tight end target that Pitt had a chance with. So there's no real one good answer. The best you can do is sort of a plurality favoring the answer that they just haven't done much with the tight ends in the last 5 years. But even that is somewhat false because Scott Orndorff was really good in 2016. Orndorff and Holtz were really good in 2015. And both of those guys in the 2 prior years and Holtz in 2012. Like I say, you had a good run from 12 to 16 of tight ends producing, but you just weren't able to carry it over. You didn't recruit well in the interim. And you even cycle back before Narduzzi's time. You have Brian O'Neill in the 2014 class. A lot of potential there. Big kid, very athletic, a basketball player. Looks like he could be a good option. He moves to the offensive line and becomes a second-round draft pick. So you can't say that was a bad move for Brian O'Neill, but it certainly didn't help Pitt's tight end depth along the way to have him move. And, you end up with, what's that stat I've thrown out there? 6 recruiting classes. You have 3 total receptions out of the tight end position from 6 recruiting classes, 14 through 19. That's a problem. And so this is one of those situations where I can't tell you what the cure is or what the root cause of the problem is. I just know they need to figure it out. And they need to get some guys in here where they can start building the depth. Now, I can tell you this. There's a lot of optimism about Lucas Kroll and what he can do. You understand why. He's a guy who is big and he can run well and he seems like he can catch. Now, if he can stay healthy, Lucas Kroll should have a big season at Pitt. I don't know if he's going to put up Adam Brenneman at UMass numbers at tight end, this coming, this fall at Pitt, but I think he's got the potential to have a really big season. One of the better seasons we've seen out of a tight end in a long time. And that's setting an admittedly very low bar, but I think he's got that kind of potential. So maybe you get a good season out of a tight end you get a good season out of Lucas Krull, and it starts opening some eyes among recruits because Pitt is recruiting with nothing right now. You know what I mean? They have no real resume to point to, at least at Pitt. You can say, well, look at what Mark Whipple did with tight ends at UMass, and look at how Adam Brenneman caught 60, 70 passes each year at UMass. But at Pitt, there's nothing really that you can point to and say, we know how to use tight ends. We know how to have success with tight ends. We've had this kind of success with tight ends. You don't have the resume. You don't have the history. And so you're kind of stuck. All right. Let's see here. What are the questions? Dan V remembers the 20-foot long trial urinals at Pitt Stadium. Yes, Dan. Those were great. Let's see. Sam Smallwood says there's too many chains in Oakland today. The university buys everything up and leases it out to the big names. Yeah, I think you're probably right, Sam. I think you got to go deep into Oakland if you really want to find the good stuff, right? You got to go deep into Oakland. Richard Tenza says, was the cricket on the bracket? And did the cricket close, Richard? I had no idea. I didn't know that. Let's see. Scrolling down. Dan V got a good question here that I actually want to talk about. What's the likelihood the football season starts on time? And this is interesting because, like I said, there weren't a lot of topics that I came into tonight's show wanting to talk about. But the impending season and what the fall is going to be is important. That is something that I do want to discuss because what we've seen here in the last couple days is a few more schools coming out with something approaching definitive plans for starting college, starting the fall semester. I think Notre Dame had a really interesting one. They want to start the fall semester in August, like 2 weeks early, and skip fall break and have everybody done by Thanksgiving. Have the fall semester over by Thanksgiving. And I think that's a really interesting idea because I always promised myself we were never going to go too far down the road of pretending like we're experts at anything, really. I mean, if you want to be honest about it, I try not to pretend like we're experts about anything here on the Panther-Lair Show, but certainly not experts about diseases and viruses and microbiologists or epidemiologists, whatever it is. We're not experts on any of these things, but it does seem like there's a growing consensus, and maybe not even growing is the right word, because it seems like there's an established consensus that you're facing a possibility of things getting really bad again once the weather gets cold. And so I think Notre Dame's got an interesting plan to, and I'm talking about Notre Dame, the school. I'm not talking about the football program here, but Notre Dame, the school, has an interesting plan to start the fall semester early and then get done before Thanksgiving, sending everybody home before it really gets cold, ideally before things would start ramping up. I think that's a really interesting idea because as we've looked at all this, and we, of course, all look at things through the spectrum of sports, but what I've tried to say all along is that sports are not going to, college sports, I don't think are going to be operating in a vacuum here. I think the decisions of athletic departments and, sports conferences, or the athletic wings of those conferences, I think a lot of those decisions are going to be influenced and guided by what the universities themselves do with their classes. And because I've contended that I just don't know if you can compel student athletes to be on campus if the rest of the student body is not. And so as such, what we've been having to pay attention to, or what I've been trying to pay a lot of attention to, is what the universities are looking to do. And I imagine what they're mostly doing is planning for a lot of different scenarios. You see this every day. This school is planning to be on campus. This school is planning to have classes in the fall. This school is planning this, planning that. I imagine they're planning a lot of things. Planning, fall semester as usual, going just exactly as planned, all the way from that extreme to the extreme of nobody's on campus. It's all remote. It's all online. And then a lot of mid-range scenarios, such as smaller class sizes, moderating, the size of your lectures, and maybe lectures happen online, but classes of 20 or less, or 12 or less, or whatever, can happen in the classroom and in person. In a lot of different scenarios. Now, Notre Dame's come up with another one here, and it's got to be one that schools like Pitt, and any school in the North has to be considering, of getting done before Thanksgiving. Now, I think that's a good thing. I think if that can happen, if Pitt does that, and if Notre Dame does that, and we get, of course, we're sitting here on May 19th, but if 3 months from now those schools are still able to execute those plans, I think that's a really good sign for the start of the football season. You know what I mean? If they believe they can pull that off, and they're right, if they're right about it, then I think you're going to get a football season as scheduled. Maybe bumped up a couple weeks. Maybe you bump it up a week or two. You're going to get into a lot of logistics issues, and it's going to be a pain in the butt. Maybe you bump it up a week or two, kind of like the school semester is getting bumped up a week or two, to, again, try to get through these things maybe before the weather turns too far. But I think when you see, Notre Dame's a big school. Notre Dame is a school with a lot riding on its fall semester. Forget athletics. It's got a lot riding on its fall semester. I mean, this is a large-scale operation. And to see them moving forward with a plan, putting in place a plan to have school, to have college in person, I think that bodes well for athletics. I felt better about the possibility of a season happening somewhat close to normal once I saw Notre Dame planning to do that. And there's stuff that comes out every day. There are things that filter out about different schools, about different conferences, about different athletic departments and football programs every day. And some of them are positive and some of them are not. You've got 23 or so California State University schools saying they're not having in-person classes, right? They're going online, and that affects 3 Mountain West schools. I think, what is it? Is it Fresno State, San Diego State, and San Jose State? They're not having classes online. Are those schools going to be able to play football? That's a big question for them. I hope, for my own enjoyment and, professionally and personally, I hope Pitt doesn't have to make that decision. I hope Pitt is able to move forward on a plan maybe similar to what Notre Dame is doing, and then they're able to have classes and have football. Let's see here. One of the questions we've got rolling in. Josh Lobig asks a big question: are you a blue cheese or a ranch guy? It depends on what wings you're eating, right? I mean, I had buffalo blue cheese wings the other day. I'm not going to dip those in really anything. They were super saucy. Or if you have a ranch flavored wing, you're not going to dip it in in ranch. You're probably not going to even dip it in blue cheese. If you're eating just a straight regular buffalo wing, depends on where you are to some extent. Mad Mex has great blue cheese, and I'll get it there, but I won't get blue cheese everywhere. I go back and forth. Probably more often than not ranch, but I go back and forth. John D. asks, considering the need at tight end, does Kai Wright see the field this year? Was really looking forward to seeing what he did this spring. And Josh Lobig follows up, adding on to that question, any idea what Kai Wright's looking like these days? He was very lean when Pitt recruited him. So, I think there's a role for Kai Wright. I think there's a spot for him to get on the field. They used 2 tight ends a decent amount last season. They put 2 guys on the field at the same time a fair amount. But, Lucas Kroll is going to be the primary guy at tight end. He's going to get the bulk of the snaps and the bulk of the reps. And when they go to 2 tight ends, then, I think Kai Wright gets opportunities. I think Kmar Mims gets opportunities. Those are the guys I would look at. It'd be interesting to see how Daniel Morega, the junior college player, is what it looks like for him. It'll be interesting to see, but I would suspect that Kai Wright will get some opportunities. He's almost, with the way he's built, to John or Josh, I forget which one of you guys asked about his build. With the way he's built, he almost looks more like an H-back than like a natural tight end. But I think there's a role for that. If you have Lucas Kroll playing in line all the time, you can move Kai Wright around, and right is probably big enough. You can have him playing in line as a sort of natural, traditional tight end and move Kroll around as well. But I would expect Kai Wright to see the field. I had high hopes for him as well. I mean, he was dominant at Farrell, and that's a lower level of football. But I mean, the guy was doing everything. He was the quarterback. He played on defense, and he was really good on both sides of the ball. Like I say, Lucas Kroll is going to be the number one guy. But I think a player like Kai Wright's got to get some opportunities in there because they're going to need two tight ends who can go out and play. Let's see. Roman checks in. Been a while. Yeah, nice to see you again, Roman. Glad you could check it out. Let's see, or glad you could stop back in on the live stream. Colin Towle asks, most impactful freshman on hoops and football. Football-wise, I've talked a lot about some of these guys, Jordan Addison, Israel Bonaconda. I think those guys are going to get a lot of play. Those guys are going to see the field a lot. I think Israel Bonaconda is going to be in the midst of the running back room. I think he's going to have every opportunity. Getting on campus early helped him with that. Maybe not as much as it would have if they had a full spring practice, but he's going to be in the mix in the running backs. And, I've talked about him a lot where he's faster than some of the big backs, the Todd Sibley and AJ Davis. But I think he's bigger, but he's also bigger than the fast back, which is Vincent Davis. And that combination should give him an opportunity to get on the field a lot if he's up to it. If he can block and do all the things running backs are required to do. If he can see the holes and catch the ball, run routes, you know what I mean? Everything that running backs are supposed to do. But that is a position where historically freshmen have been able to transition to, get on the field early. At running back, we've seen it plenty of times in the last 20 years at Pitt and beyond. And I think you should have every reason to expect Abonaconda to follow in those footsteps as well. And I'd say the same about Jordan Addison. I mean, I think Addison is going to have an opportunity. There are a few receivers who are going to be ahead of him because they're upperclassmen, but I think he's going to have every opportunity to work his way up. And again, another guy who was on campus early, who came in and I think impressed a lot of people during the 3 spring practices they had. I think the coaches were really excited to get him onto the roster. They had to fight hard to hold on to him. When you've got Michigan or Notre Dame pushing for him late in the recruiting process, Maryland gets him on campus. And, I mean, say what you want about Maryland, but Mike Locksley can recruit. And the guy is a big-time recruiter, and he's got a reputation that he has earned. And so you hold him off. You hold off Michigan. You hold off Notre Dame. You did pretty well for yourself. And I think that speaks to the talent that Jordan Addison is, that these schools were really trying to pull him away late in the process. And so the Pitt coaches were really excited about getting him onto the roster. I think they were excited about what he did in spring camp, and I think they're looking forward to seeing what he can do in the season. I think they expect him to contribute this year, and so I would look for him as well. Basketball-wise, John Hughley gets most of the praise, gets most of the he has most of the hype, most of the expectations on him, I think. And so I'd look at him. I think Noah Collier is interesting too, and he might be like a surprise guy who could come in and really impress. And really, I mean, Femi Odekal, I think also is another guy who he moved up in the final Rivals rankings for the class of 2020. He's going to get playing time because they need another guard to be out there with Xavier Johnson and Ethiel Horton. I think Odekal is going to see the court. He's going to see minutes, and I think Collier is going to see minutes, and Hughley is going to see minutes. Which one is going to be the best? I mean, I lean toward Hughley, but I wouldn't be surprised by Collier. I wouldn't be surprised by Odekal either. It's just, with Odekal, it's going to be a matter of minutes. You know what I mean? It's going to be a matter of, he's going to get minutes, but how many is he going to get? Because Johnson and Horton are going to play a ton. So it's going to be a tough call on that, just, what kind of opportunities there will be, for him on the field. Let's see. Royce Beacom says, and Royce, I'm going to take your word on this. I haven't read this or confirmed this, but Royce Beacom says Pitt is one of 4 ACC schools that hasn't committed to having students on campus in the fall. What do you do if the rest of the conference is on campus but Pitt is not? Well, your first question is, do you have football if your what do you do with football? Do you have football if the general student body is not on campus? Do you have football? And my thought is no. And, Leon Moore, 23, says as long as classes resume in any way, football will happen. And I agree with that, Leon. I think that's been my point all along. I don't know if you can have sports without – I don't know if you can have college football without college. Now, if the rest of the conference has classes and all the students are on campus and Pitt doesn't, then you might have, 13 schools playing football and one not. And we've seen this being reported as being discussed, not necessarily, or not at least not specifically in the ACC, but, there are reports that around college football it's being discussed of, schools within conferences are talking to each other and saying, okay, what are we going to do? What scenarios do we have if some of the schools in our conference don't play? They're considering the possibilities that you only have part of the conference actually playing football. And, there's different scenarios that have been thrown around or possibilities of, well, you could, they've talked about playing home and homes, and Pitt and Virginia play a home and home. If North Carolina doesn't play this year, Pitt and Virginia could do a home and home to fill in that spot on the schedule. And that's just a hypothetical, just as an example. But these things are being discussed and being talked about. So, I mean, that's what happens if, the rest of the conference plays and Pitt doesn't, or the rest of the conference plays and Georgia Tech doesn't, or the rest of the conference plays and Virginia doesn't, just to name examples. I mean, they're exploring a lot of scenarios right now. And they're looking at a lot of different options and possibilities because nobody really knows other than believing that it's probably going to be atypical in some way. Leon Moore 23 says, who's your starting running back heading into the opener? That's a good question. I wouldn't rule out anybody, really. I would say A.J. Davis, Vincent Davis, or Israel Abanikanda. I'm guessing the freshman doesn't win the starting job. Just guessing because there's so many upperclassmen, so many not seniors. I mean, there's one senior, but Vincent Davis is a sophomore. AJ Davis is a senior. Even Todd Sibley's a redshirt junior, wherever he's going to be health wise after he got hurt last year. I would guess Abanikanda doesn't start, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a lot of reps, like I said. So I mean, I could see it being AJ Davis or Vincent Davis. Maybe I'll just say that, Leon. Pitt's starting running back in for the opener in 2020. We'll have Davis on the back of his jersey. That's my answer. Dave Bolowitz asks a question that I don't have an answer to. He says, when Pitt travels, will you travel or chance getting infected? I can't answer that question right now, Dave. I've got a plane ticket to Florida State. I know that. I've got that one locked in. I don't think I necessarily would need to fly. Where else do they play on the road this year? So they play at Miami. That's a trip. That's a flight. There are only a few in this conference that I know. Yeah, I mean, in the Coastal Division, I fly to Miami. I fly to Georgia Tech. I'll drive just about everywhere else. Last year, I think I flew to Duke, maybe, or maybe I drove that one. I forget if I flew or drove that one. I know that in 2018, I drove pretty much everything. Not Miami. I flew to Miami, but I drove pretty much the entire rest of the season. And when it came time for the ACC championship game, I was just I'm tired of driving. So I think I flew into Greensboro and drove up to Charlotte from there. But this year, Miami and Florida State are definite flights. The others, I'll drive. I mean, I'll drive to Virginia. That's a nice drive. I like making that drive. I'll drive to North Carolina. Where else? Who else do they play on the road? Oh, yeah, Carolina. Nah, I forget. I don't know what the answer is. Like I said, I already have tickets for the Florida State flight, and we'll see. I just can't answer that right now. If the games were a week from now, well, I'm not going to even get into that hypothetical. It's a good question though, Dave. I don't know. I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to get some questions here out of Twitter and Facebook. Jeff Ferruza on Facebook asked, do you think we'd land Malik Newton? And Malik Newton, he's a big-time running back prospect. He's a 3-star, but he's got an offer sheet that I think, if you looked at it, you would say is, that's the kind of offer sheet for a 4-star kid. I actually meant to have his profile brought up here. I brought up the commitment list instead of the offer sheet. Meant to have this opened up. He's a kid out of Virginia. So you've got Chris Beatty, the wide receivers coach, working on him. Beatty, if he's not Pitt's best recruiter right now, he's high on the list. Newton is in Norfolk, Virginia. He's a 5.7 on the Rivals rating scale, which puts him just outside of 4-star range. He's got offers from Clemson, Louisville, Maryland, Nebraska, Penn State, Pitt, South Carolina, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Purdue, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Virginia. So, yeah, he's big time. He's a big-time prospect. He's a big running back. I use the word big a lot, but that's how you describe Malik Newton. He's 5'11", 215, 220, a bigger back like that. And, yeah, I think Pitt's got a really good chance of landing him, even with that offer sheet. And I think most of those offers are legit. We always talk about offer sheets, but we also talk about, which offers are real and who's really got an offer. I think his offers are pretty legit, and I think Pitt's got a really good chance of landing him, potentially even before the end of the month. And that's, Butler Pitt fan on Panther-Lair.com asked that same question. How confident do you feel about Malik Newton choosing Pitt, and do you think it'll happen sooner rather than later? And I do. I think they've got a really good chance of landing him, and I think it could happen, in the next few weeks. I think he even told me that he's close to making a commitment. He didn't say specifically to Pitt, but he said he's close to making a commitment. So that's certainly one we're keeping an eye on. Butler Pitt fan also asked, do you feel that Pitt ends up with 5 offensive linemen in this recruiting class once the class is signed? And, I really do. They're at 4 right now, and they're not slowing down. Was it 2 Sundays ago when they got 2 offensive line commitments? Later that night, they offered another offensive lineman. So the coaching staff clearly wants another lineman in this class. I don't think they were offering a guy on the day they got 2 commitments just for insurance. So they clearly want more commitments in this class. They want another offensive lineman or 2, and I think they're going to try to get it. They've got a lot of lines in the water. They've got a lot of offers out to offensive linemen. They've got a lot of guys that they're going after, and I think they're going to try and grab a 5th one in this class. And we've talked about this before, so I'll just touch on it briefly. But, we've talked about it on prior podcasts. We've talked about it in the 3-2-1 column that, this is a bigger class for Pitt, a larger class. They're going to take a lot of guys in this class, and they need to stock up the offensive line numbers. They need to attack this situation with numbers because they're coming up on some real depth issues here in the next 2 years, 3 years. And so this 2021 class is important because they need some numbers. And they haven't gotten a lot of numbers on the offensive line in the last couple of years. So, yeah, I think they're going to try and get 5. Who knows? Maybe the stars align and they take 6. I think it's possible. RHob17 on Panther-Lair.com says, we know about the Whippeal guys and some others, but are there any other big-time names we should be aware of and keeping our eyes on in this recruiting cycle? And I think he's probably talking about 4-star recruits, a high-end 3-star guy who's maybe underrated a little bit. And, he already kind of canceled out the local guys because, Elliot Donald is a really good option, I think, for Pitt. The big-time defensive lineman. His last name, and yes, there is a relation. He's a 4-star prospect, and I like Pitt's chances with him a lot. Otherwise, Hobbs mentioned a defensive end out of New Jersey named George Rooks, who's another 4-star guy who's pretty high on Pitt. I see a few sort of higher-end 3-star guys, Malik Newton, who we mentioned earlier, Tyreek Chappell, a wide receiver, defensive back out of just a general all-around really good athlete out of Philadelphia. I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. He's got a really legit offer sheet, and I think he's pretty high on Pitt. I don't know. You could always be surprised, but I don't see a lot of other 4-star prospects, guys who are currently 4-stars on Rivals, having Pitt high on their list at this point right now in the recruiting process. I things can always change, and some of the guys that they're in on could always get bumped up to 4 stars. But those are kind of some of the main ones we, kind of turn to on a regular, or the ones we're really kind of keeping an eye on. I think when you talk about Malik Newton or someone like that. Turek44 on Panther-Lair.com asked an interesting question, and I saw this question earlier, and I thought about it, and I didn't really come up with a good answer. He says, one of my favorite reads every summer is the rundown of prospects that attend Pitt's summer camps, and that actually might be his favorite thing to read. What is your favorite annual report or series to write up for Panther-Lair.com? And I think that's a great question, man. I like thinking about this kind of stuff. I think it's fun to think about like what we do during the year and things that are fun to write. And I don't know, I think it's like seasonal. Like there's stuff that I really like doing in the fall. Every year in the fall during the football season, we'll go through and just like run down numbers, whether it's Pro Football Focus numbers or numbers I keep myself, spreadsheets I put together of passing targets or down in distances or third downs or personnel groups, whatever it is. I like doing that stuff. I like just sitting down on like a Wednesday afternoon or a Tuesday night or something, and kind of like what we're doing right here, and just looking at it until whatever the stories are just sort of come out. Like, oh, this guy has been a popular target on third down, or this guy has been, this quarterback does this under pressure, or what have you. I like digging into that stuff in the fall. I tell you, in the winter, some of the most exciting stuff is when the coaches are out on the road visiting recruits in home and kind of tracking all that stuff down, and where are they going, who are they visiting next, what are they doing next, where have they been, and who are they going to see, and what does it mean, and when are official visits getting scheduled. That stuff, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of late nights, and I end up writing things at like 11:30 at night and posting them on the message boards, but those are pretty fun to do also. You get into the spring, and there's a lot of spring recruiting stuff, and then June and July June is always a big recruiting month, but July is always interesting because there's not a lot going on, and so we're kind of forced to get creative in what we write about, not make stuff up, but look for new angles and new ways to repackage things and new ways to, different retrospectives or track down people for interesting interviews. And I think that's always kind of fun to come up with an idea and then dig into it. And we've already started, I already started putting together a few things for this next month or two, since June is going to be so different with no prospect camps and no official visits and no recruiting visits at all. So there's really, each time of year kind of has things that I really enjoy doing, and hopefully people enjoy reading them as well. Kind of along those lines, HOF coach on Panther-Lair.com says, what led to your decision to add personnel to the Lair who focus exclusively on basketball? The additional coverage has been very good and it's appreciated. Yeah, in the last 2 weeks, if you haven't been reading Panther-Lair.com, you might have missed this. We added a couple people to our staff, and I'm proud of the fact that in whatever is going on in the world right now, we've been able to add to the staff. And a big part of the reason is because people have stuck with the site. Subscribers stay with the site. We're able to continue to invest back in the site. And so I really appreciate the people who've stuck with us. And as a result, we've been able to go out and we hired 2 guys, Houston Wilson to help us on our basketball coverage, and then Steven Gertz to help us on our team Houston Wilson to help us on our basketball recruiting coverage, and Steven Gertz to help us on our team coverage. And are now a young guy who's been working in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area, covering basketball recruiting for a while now. And he's come in and just done a great bang-up job for the first couple weeks for us here, covering and reporting on some of the guys at Pitt's after and doing some really good stuff. And then Steven Gertz has been working for the great Cardiac Hill blog for a while. I'm not sure how long he was writing for those guys, but he was always doing this great analysis stuff. He was, videos and breakdowns that are far beyond my pay scale, or my, far beyond how my brain works when it comes to basketball. The guy's just really smart when it comes to hoops. And so I was like, we got to get this guy on here and do this stuff for us. And so he's been doing, you got to check out his analysis of like Xavier Johnson and Adis Toney. The insight is just, it's really smart, and it's really insightful, and you learn something. I've learned a lot just reading his stuff. And so, we brought those guys on because I wanted to do more basketball coverage. I wanted Panther-Lair.com to have more basketball coverage. And Houston and Steven have provided some great stuff so far, and I think they're going to keep providing great stuff, particularly as we get closer to actual basketball happening. So hopefully, if you're a subscriber to Panther-Lair.com, I hope you have been reading their stuff and enjoying it, and learning from it. I hope it's giving you the kind of coverage you want for Pitt basketball. Back to the live stream with some questions here. John D says, why does it seem people aren't excited enough about Hughley? The incoming class is great and there's plenty of talent. We need bigs and seems like a perfect piece. I would kind of disagree with you, John. I feel like people are most excited about John Hughley. I think Hughley is the guy that Pitt fans are most looking forward to seeing there, because I think Pitt fans are tired of watching Terrell Brown and waiting for the light to click for Terrell Brown. I think they're tired of seeing those flashes, those tantalizing flashes that never really turn into anything. And I think there's optimism about Abdul Kareem Coulibaly, but not as much as there is hype about John Hughley. And I think Pitt fans are really excited about Hughley. I think other guys are going to contribute out of this class, but I think there's a lot of hype about Hughley for sure. Josh Lobig says, if we see a shortened season, conference play only, what do we expect? I know we've had collapses the last few seasons, but I think early FCS games will really help with the offensive line, the receivers, and the running game. And I agree, Josh. Those early games are good for tune-ups. I don't know if Pat Narduzzi is always taking full advantage of them by trying to hide so much and be so secretive and keep things so quiet that they don't really run a full version of their offense. And to be honest, you've got a third-year starter at quarterback. You've got all these starters back on the offensive line. You've got, yes, a young running back and you've got a young wide receiver, but you've got veteran running backs and veteran wide receivers. I don't think they should need a warm-up game. I don't think it could help, but I think these guys should be able to go to camp and come out and be ready to go, because they've all been around for a while. I don't think they need I shouldn't say I don't think they need. I think everybody can benefit from a preseason game. Everybody could benefit from an FCS game. But if you're going to approach it the way Pat Narduzzi has, I think it loses a lot of the benefit. That's just me. Now everybody keeps things back in their FCS games, but I don't know if anybody does it as severely as Pat Narduzzi has, as Pitt has under Pat Narduzzi. Josh Newark asks a question that I don't really know if I'm going to have an answer to, but he says, rabbit hole question. Testing has to be a part of having football in the fall, but who is going to monitor or police schools to be honest about any player testing positive? Will schools hide a positive test if it's an important player on their team? I don't know, Josh. You might be right. It's a rabbit hole question. It might just be a question that I'm going to offer just out there as a comment from you. Because I don't have an answer for that. I would have to think schools would get slammed pretty hard, not just from the NCAA, but with lawsuits, with liability, if they were to try and pull something like that. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine schools doing it, but I also can't. I can't really fathom the ramifications there. That's all you, man. Josh Lobig says, I haven't even thought of losing players due to infection. That's daunting. And the thing is, you lose players to infection. You have one guy test positive, and I think you've lost pretty much anybody they came in contact with, right? You've got to make sure that nobody else on the team has it, and you've got to wait 2 weeks to find out if they do. There's a lot of logistics to this that have to be worked out. Nicholas Temperio says, write it down. If Kenny Pickett stays healthy, he will double his touchdown numbers from this past season. It's an interesting thought, Nicholas. Kenny Pickett, 13 touchdowns last year, 9 interceptions. You would certainly think that somebody threw 470 passes and had 3,000 passing yards would do better than 13 touchdowns. It's the law of averages have to kind of work out. There has to be a positive regression to the mean there that's going to bring up those touchdown numbers. Is he going to get 26 touchdowns? I don't know. That's around the range of, quite frankly, that's not a crazy number in college football. That's not outrageous. That's, I mean, Nate Peterman was around that range. I think Tom Savage was around that range. I think Tino Sinceri was around that range. Kenny Pickett should be able to push 20, 25, 26 touchdowns. It shouldn't be crazy with a pass-heavy offense like Pitt has. But there are a lot of things that have to go right for that to happen. They have to be better in the red zone. And a big part of that is going to be the running game. I think if you run the ball better, your red zone offense improves. If your red zone offense improves, and Kenny Pickett's numbers go up. Leon Moore 23 says, with everyone coming back and the good schedule with just Notre Dame and Florida State down last year, the stars will align. That's what everyone's banking on, Leon. I think everybody is looking at the situation with the coronavirus and the possibility of football in the fall being truncated or adjusted or canceled or just happening in some atypical way as being Pitt's perfect luck that they have one of their better teams in quite some time, and it's a season that's played in quarantine. Leon Moore 23 follows up. I like Vincent Davis. Thought he didn't get enough carries and never ran the Wildcat, even though he scored one of the best touchdowns of the year versus Georgia Tech. Yeah, he probably could have done the Wildcat a little bit more than he did. He took some snaps out of it. I think even no, it was A.J. Davis who took a Wildcat snap in the bowl game, right? Because and like lost yardage on the play, I think, went the wrong direction and lost the yardage on the play, and then did not get any snaps again after that, or didn't get any carries after that. Vincent Davis has run some Wildcat. I think he can do it. I think he's an interesting option because if the blocking's right, I mean, things should be set up for those plays to pop. And I mean, Todd Sibley did it really well. Todd Sibley did it really well last year. It's just a matter of the blocking to set up properly and the running back to follow the hole. And Vincent Davis, I think, does a decent job following the hole. He just needs the hole to be there because he's not big enough to break a tackle on a regular basis. You're not going to rely on him doing it. He's broken tackles at different times. But he's, not big enough that you're going to rely on him consistently breaking tackles. And so you need the holes to be there. And if they're there in the Wildcat, then yeah, I think he can get a lot of, get a lot of numbers, get a lot of yards out of it. Rolling down through, Leon Moore is chiming in here, man. You are talking a lot. I can't get all of your, a lot of comments. Richard Tenza says, you interviewed Scott McKillop, and he said, we just haven't had that guy in a long time. Do you foresee any of the current guys with the it factor? I don't know. It's hard to tell. I mean, like, when you talk about media perception and what we see from the outside of, and I think when you're talking about the it factor and what we talked about with Scott McKillop is that leader who can really step up and lead the team, either on offense or defense. And it's best if it's the quarterback and the middle linebacker. And when Pitt had its best leadership, I think of this century, it was with Tyler Palko at quarterback and Scott McKillop at middle linebacker. Now, that team, and actually, wait, those two guys never overlapped. Except for like the West Virginia game in 2005 when Pitt got trucked. But I mean, like, some of the best leaders they've had were Palko and McKillop, and HB Blades before McKillop. But we saw those guys a lot in practice. We witnessed them. We talked to them a lot. And we got a good feel for their personalities. I haven't sensed that all that much from guys on the current team. Those kinds of personalities, that kind of attitude, that kind of leadership mentality, but I'm also not around them as much as I was around McKillop and Palko and Blades and those guys, just with the rules and the way things are set up with practice times and media availabilities. And I mean, not to go too far down this rabbit hole of talking about what it was like 15 years ago and what it's like now, but it was pretty different. It was considerably different. And there was a big, there was a lot more access to the players back then. You had a lot more of a feel for the players back then. You got to know the team a lot better back then than you do now. And so it's harder to judge and make those statements of like, who's the leader on this team? Well, I don't know. DeMar Hamlin or, Rashad Weaver, I guess. Kenny Pickett, Jimmy Morrissey. I don't know if I see those guys as having whatever it was that drove Palko and McKillop and all of those guys. But again, when you're not around them as much, it can be tougher to get a real vibe for it, I guess. All right, I really do appreciate this crowdsourced episode. I liked getting all the questions, and questions keep coming in on the live chat. I didn't even get all the questions from Twitter and Facebook and Panther-Lair.com, so we'll have to save some of those for next week. But I appreciate everybody who participated, though. It's fun to just, I mean, like we're kind of just sitting back and talking Pitt sports, right? It's not quite a Zoom session because I'm the only one talking, but it is a little bit of back and forth. It's a little interaction. It's kind of a fun. It's fun to just have conversations every now and then. And like I say, I think some of the developments we saw this week with some different colleges and over the last few days have left me more optimistic about the season happening this fall, which would be a good thing because, like we said, Pitt's got a really good team, and I think there's a chance to watch a team have some success. And it would be unfortunate if they were not able to do it. Make sure you go to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, football, basketball, recruiting coverage. We have it all there at Panther-Lair.com. Some really great hoop stuff coming in right now on the recruiting front and the team analysis front. You got to check that stuff out with our new hires, our new guys, Houston and Steven. Those guys are doing a great job. And, of course, we've got all the football stuff covered as well. Panther-Lair.com. And I talk about how we interact with each other and we have these chances to talk about Pitt sports. I mean, that's what the message boards are. Message boards all day, every day. People are talking about Pitt sports at Panther-Lair.com. I appreciate everybody tuning in on this podcast. Oh, got to say, Saturday mornings, 8 a.m., the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan. We talk about a lot of this stuff on the radio. We talk about Pitt sports on The Fan for an hour, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., so tune into that. And then this live stream every Tuesday night, 8:30, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and also, of course, the podcast that we release. But go like Panther-Lair.com on YouTube. Get those like numbers up. Do me a solid on that one. I really appreciate it, so we can keep this thing going and make it make it work, and keep doing this. Every Tuesday night we'll get together and hang out and talk some Pitt sports. So thanks for tuning in on the live stream. Thanks for offering up your questions if you did, and thanks for tuning in on the podcast. Everybody have a great week. It was fun to catch up. We'll be back, like I say, Saturday morning, 8 a.m. Oh, and don't forget, on Friday, we'll have the Conversations podcast. Got a good guest for this week. I'm not going to tell you who it is yet because I might have a couple options, so I have to decide which one to throw out there. But look for that. Subscribe to Panther-Lair podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. We should be there. So check that out. Look for that podcast on Friday. Check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. We'll talk to you there. Have a great week. Have a safe week. Thanks for tuning in. And is there anything else I want to say to you? Oh, Voodoo Ranger, 1985 IPA. Go get you some because it's good. All right. Have a great week. Talk to you later.